Hello friends! In this video you will see a manhwa called Betrayal of Dignity. Please put a like and subscribe if you like this video. Let's go! A carriage was driving along a forest road on a summer day. Inside sat two beautiful ladies, Alice and Chloe Verdier. They were sisters-in-law. The elder, Chloe, had an affliction that forced her to walk with a cane in her hands all her life, but it did not take away from her beauty in any way. All along the way, she was admonishing the younger one not to make any mistakes at the dinner party to which they had been invited. Alice guiltily said that the last of the soirees had been incredibly boring, so she couldn't help it that time. How was she to know that so many glasses of sherry would make her intoxicated? At those words, she shrugged carelessly, as if no one else had ever gotten drunk from a glass of wine. Then excitedly, Alice said that she was sure it would be a lot of fun tonight, and asked Chloe if she thought so too. Chloe sincerely told her sister that she should curb her temper. This ball was hosted by none other than the Duke of Taisi himself. And at this ball, Alice needed to find her potential partner, who would later become her fiancé. It was vitally important. Alice replied that she knew perfectly well that her engagement was the only thing that could save their family from total ruin. Then Alice sighed sadly and added that she'd always hoped to find a man whose feelings for her would overwhelm her. Chloe clasped her hands on her cane and told her sister that she was sorry, for if she herself had been able, she would have taken the burden of a marriage of convenience upon herself. The elder sister thought that she wished there was no need to put such a heavy burden on her younger sister. It was all the fault of her leg. Alice raised her head sharply and then jumped up on the spot, walked a couple of steps on the carriage, and sat down beside her sister, clinging tightly to her. Hugging her, she asked Chloe what was there for her to regret. If anyone is to blame, it is their father for his mad love for their mother, because of which he squandered his entire fortune on medical bills and completely unable to cope with the management of the estate. Chloe asked Alice to speak more respectfully. Then, outraged, her younger sister asked her to remember what happened 3 years ago. Back then, their father had allowed himself to use their estate by the Duke of Tis's army, despite the family's dire circumstances. Even though he and their father, Alice didn't hesitate to declare that he was either with a big heart of gold or simply a fool. Chloe thought for a moment. Her mind recalled all the times she had heard others discuss Duke Taisa. There hadn't been a single good rumor about him. The young duke that led the soldiers to a great victory was rumored to be the father of several illegitimate children by his mistresses and executed them in secret. Many say he had a nasty temper, and if you get under his hot hand, he will completely crush you, regardless of your title. Alice, discussing this, said that many people think that it would be much better if the Duke died on the battlefield. Chloe told her sister that, given the situation of their family, they were very lucky to be invited to such an event at all. Alice said that even so, it's still not worth getting involved with the Duke. There are too many sinister rumors around him, and they have no idea what his true intentions are. Lastly, Chloe angrily said that she hoped they wouldn't run into the Duke throughout the ball, so they could have some fun. Chloe got upset, lowering her head. She wanted to say that they still have to say hello to him, because he is the master of the party, but only bit her lip and tightened her grip on the cane. She was afraid, but she told herself mentally that she could not let that fear get the better of her. At Verdier Manor 3 years ago, Viscount Verdier, the lord of the small castle, had gladly opened the gates for the imperial army as it retreated. Chloe Verdier, the Viscount's eldest daughter, had stayed on the estate to tend to the wounded. The soldiers wondered, how did a girl who was a cripple herself care for them? Would she not be a burden in this work? Others answered that they should leave the cripple alone. Chloe heard every word they said. Then the indignant soldiers replied that they did not mind, and even if the Viscount's daughter was an invalid, her face was pretty. While his daughter was bandaging the wounded hands of the soldiers, the Viscount watched her work from afar and also listened to the soldiers' discussions about his daughter. In the evening of the same day, While Chloe was in her room, her close servant came to her and informed her that the Lord had asked her to leave the wounded in the care of the servants. The girl replied that she understood, and being left alone, she thought, had she made her father worry? She got up and went to the window to look at the camp of soldiers. They had set up tents in the courtyard and were sitting by the fires to keep warm. Chloe thought about realizing the pain they were enduring and being on edge from. She had been taught from childhood that it was a nobleman's duty to come to the aid of the destitute and infirm. Suddenly, all the soldiers stood in formation and saluted, and one of the voices loudly announced, "Attention!" which meant that their commander had come to see them. The man who came said that this afternoon he had received news of the death of his father, Wilhelm von Teese. He had been beheaded by the enemy, who had decided to hang his head at the walls of his castle. At this news, the soldiers wilted, some lowered their heads in grief, some cried. One of them sniffed loudly to quiet his tears. Then the Duke turned to him and asked if he wished to return home. The soldier was confused and did not answer at once. Then the Duke said that he did not seem to want to. The soldier objected and said he wanted to go home very much. His wife had recently given birth to a child while he was here, and more than anything, he wanted to see the two of them together. The Duke turned to the other man and asked, "What about him?" The soldier replied that he was worried about his sick and lonely mother, whom he had to leave alone. The third said he had to work to feed his younger brother so he wouldn't starve. The fourth exclaimed that he had a bride waiting for him at home. Each of them began to share their reason for wanting to return home. Chloe, watching and hearing everything, felt the despair in their words. After listening to everyone, the Duke said that, as they could see, there were many reasons why they had to end the war and return to their homes. The same was true for himself. He was unable to take his father's body away, let alone hold a funeral to lay him to rest. However, they must remember that it is not God's will that wars are won or lost, and that is why he refuses to back down, and promises that he will do whatever it takes to lead his soldiers to victory. After all, this is a matter of pride and dignity for the House of Teese. These words belong to the Duke, whose full name was Demian Ernst von Teese. During the fiery speech of Demian Teese, Chloe felt a little excitement in her soul. Her heart was beating a little faster than usual, and a blush appeared on her cheeks. The Duke told the soldiers that it was now up to them to put their despair and longing that they had shown him into action. The army raised their hands in the air and shouted hurrah. Chloe marveled at how the Duke instantly managed to raise the morale of the soldiers, and her heart beat faster and faster. The Duke turned out to be a more outstanding person than she had expected. The commander, calmly standing aside, suddenly raised his eyes and looked at the window on the second floor of the mansion where Chloe was standing. Meeting his gaze, Chloe was standing. Meeting his gaze, Chloe was startled and immediately fell sharply to the floor, hiding from the window, and covered her mouth with her hands. Having calmed down a little, she looked again at the edge of the window without rising to her full height. The Duke stood with his back to her, walking away into the distance. Chloe breathed a sigh of relief and relaxed. She thought that she could never have done something like this after hearing of her father's passing. She felt sad for the Duke. Chloe folded her hands in a prayer gesture and asked the Lord God to take care of these soldiers and help them get home and take care of their loved ones. The Duke, stopping on the road, thought that he wished very much that the yearning of these men would bear great fruit in the war. The next morning, putting on her warm coat and taking the basket in her cane, free hand, Chloe left her room, looking around. She did not want to get in anyone's sight, and was going to hurry out before she was discovered and before anyone woke up. But suddenly, someone called out to her. She froze, and when she turned around, she saw her chief servant, Gilles. From surprise, the girl did not have time to hold the cane. It slipped, and Chloe began to fall. Gilles picked her up by the waist and helped her to keep her balance. Chloe smilingly told the young man that he had saved her. Embarrassed, Gilles took a step back and asked where the lady was going so early in the morning. After all, last night the gentleman had asked her to stay in her room. Chloe replied that she wanted to gather some medicinal herbs in the woods. Gillis said that he could do it for her. Chloe then asked what they would do when he brought poisonous herbs like last time, scaring the hell out of him. Gillis did not know what to answer or where to put himself. And then Chloe said that it would be better if she went and gathered the herbs herself. Gillis said that the air outside was cold, and it was easy to catch a cold, and her father was worried about his daughter. Chloe replied that there was no reason to worry. She had gotten out on her own many times on her own, much less into the woods of their estate. Gillis relented and asked his mistress to be more careful. As they walked further down the hallway, the girl thought about how, when they first met Gillis, his head barely reached her shoulders. Since then, he had grown to become a fine, tall young man. Gathering herbs covered in snow, Chloe reflected on the fact that everyone around her worked hard, and she had to be useful too. Suddenly, she heard a rustling nearby. Looking out from behind the bushes, she saw how in a few steps, with his back to her, stood the Duke. Chloe, in a panic, began to think why he was here, after all. Except for her, no one knew about this place. Something told her to leave as soon as possible. She took her cane and basket in her hands and was about to leave. But she stepped on a dry leaf. The Duke immediately turned and asked who was here. From surprise, Chloe froze and dropped the basket. The Duke angrily repeated, demanding her name. Chloe went up to him and apologized, then introduced herself by her own name. Chloe Verdier, the daughter of Viscount Verdier. The Duke looked down at her, and the girl herself hunched over from the awkwardness of what was happening. Taking steps in her direction, the Duke said that he had noticed a pattern since last night. It seems that Viscount Verdier's eldest daughter has a habit of spying on people like a little rat. Chloe apologized to the Duke if she had offended him, but swearing on her own name, she admitted that she had done nothing of the sort now. Then the Duke asked if that meant that she had done it yesterday. And then came the impossibly impertinent question. Duke Tissé directly asked if, at the request of her father, Chloe had tried to seduce him. Chloe was stunned, her eyes opened wide. Without waiting for an answer, the Duke said that Lord Verdier is not as naive as he seems, and called the Viscount ambitious little guy. Chloe clenched her hands and, lowering her head, said that it was not so. It cost her no small effort to keep her composure. The Duke smirked and said that in that case, why would she expose herself, treating the nasty, pus-filled wounds of his soldiers? Wasn't it to get the commander's attention, since his regiment was shown such care? The Duke also added that even though the House of Verdier was of low rank, such a job was not befitting a noblewoman, especially with her fortune. He emphasized these words and looked at the girl's cane. At this moment, Chloe wondered, was the man she had seen yesterday really standing in front of her now? She was stunned by such rudeness. Taking the cane tighter, the girl raised her head and said that she was only trying to help those who went to war to protect their families, and she didn't know her title would be a problem. Her late mother had taught her and her sister that although our family was insignificant in their position as nobles, they had a duty to come to the aid of those in need. This is exactly the kind of behavior expected of a nobleman. The Duke laughed, repeating the words about a nobleman's duty, and then leaned over Chloe. He asked if it had never occurred to her that trying to do something beyond one's capabilities was not only presumptuous, but inconvenient to others. If Chloe had only heard the lewd jokes the men told as she waddled between them, would she be able to hold her head high after such a thing? And speak out on the behavior of a noblewoman? What if the Viscount had inadvertently heard it? The Duke had said that if he were in the Viscount's shoes, he would cut off the head of anyone who dared to tarnish his daughter's name. Before Chloe's eyes came the realization that yesterday, when she was treating the soldiers' wounds, many of them were whispering, and her father was standing nearby, and had forbidden her to leave her room afterward. The Duke touched the girl's hair, and added that these soldiers had seen dozens of their comrades killed in battle. Does she know what that does to a man? And what's more, it's not even fully dawn yet, and she's already wandering around the forest with her leg. If something were to happen to her, who would be to blame? At this question, the Duke ran his thumb over Chloe's lower lip. The girl turned away sharply and said that this land became part of Verdier's domain long before she was born. and no one dares to enter this territory without permission. It is safe here. The Duke smirked and asked if it was safe. Angry Chloe loudly replied that it was absolutely safe. Then the Duke snatched the cane out of her hands and asked if she would continue this nonsense once she was in this position. Chloe reached for the cane, almost falling, and demanded it back. The Duke dodged it, and with a graceful movement, thrust the end of the cane right into the head of the crawling snake. Pulling the cane out, he said that there was always danger lurking in the woods. And if she thought otherwise, she was reckless. Returning Chloe's cane, the Duke added that it was damaged, but the girl should be able to return to the castle. Chloe, not accepting the cane back, said she shouldn't, and thanked him. The Duke grinned and said that Chloe's temper was not lacking, which was a surprise to him. Then he asked her to let him look at her leg, and he pulled up the hem of her dress a little, exposing her feet, clad in ballet flats. Examining it, he asked if it was hereditary. From such an impertinent act, Chloe flashed, and then loudly asked why he continued to be so rude. The Duke, standing up, told the girl that she was too sensitive. He had just asked a question, and she had already taken it as a blow. And if she let her emotions take over, she would only lose. Chloe replied that she was not a soldier and not in the war. But the Duke said that life is a lot of battles, especially for someone like Chloe. The girl replied that that might be true, but it's still no reason to stick your nose into her life. The Duke said that he just wanted to give her advice, and her unwillingness to thank him said that he had hurt her feelings. Then Chloe thought that Duke Tisi is a devil in human form. He always had a sarcastic answer to her every attack. She told herself in her mind that she should have no more illusions about him. Clenching her hands on the skirt of her dress, Chloe said that, with all due respect to the Duke, she had two things to say to him. The Duke was all ears. First, regarding the broken cane, Chloe asked for a replacement. The Duke replied that he would talk to the carpenter as soon as he returned to the barracks. Chloe, however, said that wouldn't do. She wanted a cane made of birch trees that grow in the Duchy of Tisi. The Duke narrowed his eyes. Chloe said she recalled him saying yesterday that he would return from the war victorious. And after all, one day he would return to the Duchy of Tisi, and she wanted him to do. Before Chloe could finish, the Duke, stroking the girl's hair, came closer to her, and calling her his lady, asked what if he was ready to give her something better. Taking Chloe's face in the palms of his hands, the Duke said that, from the looks of it, her father definitely wanted something more. Chloe interrupted, and said that that was what brought her to the second point. Dismissing the Duke's hand, the girl said that if her father praised his daughters in his presence, it was purely because of fatherly love. And though he adored his children, he was not so detached from life that he forgot that the House of Verdier was no match for the position of the House of Tisi. Then Chloe added that the Duke is not the only one who would prefer not to get mixed up with an inferior woman, and she was sure the same was true of all men. The Duke told Chloe to save her self-humiliation for her personal journal. Chloe responded negatively, and walking away said that when it comes to the truth, there can be no humiliation. She wanted to be clear. He was free to feel sorry for her, but the Duke dared not allow the idea that she was unhappy, or that her life was like a battle. The Duke asked if it turns out that she is happy living like that. Chloe stopped. Hetzrog turned around and told her that nothing would ever change in her life. Chloe replied that she was content, living a peaceful, unchanging life, in the place where she was born for the rest of her days. That's where her happiness lies. These words, the confidence and boldness with which they were said, struck the Duke, and he opened his eyes wide, looking at Chloe. Chloe did not remember well how she had returned to the castle then, after her confrontation with Duke Tisi. All she knew was that the cold morning wind had enveloped her the entire way, similar to the snake she'd seen in the forest. One day, while Chloe was still sick, Gillies came to her and informed her that the Duke, along with his army, had left their mansion. The girl, being in heat, thanked the servant. It was important for her to know that the Duke was no longer around. This way she felt safe and at peace. It was quite some time before she ventured back into that forest. So, she spent the rest of the road indulging in some not-so-pleasant memories. She and Alice arrived at the place and walked up the steps to the door of Tiss's castle. 3 years ago, Chloe's first meeting with the Duke had happened, and since then she had never seen him again. Entering the magnificent Golden Hall, she and her sister could not believe that this castle was used only for the Duke's revels, and only for one season a year. Alice said it was just ridiculous. Chloe asked Alice to be quiet. At that moment, a young boy came up to them and addressed Lady Alice. The girl answered him that she was glad to see him again. It was Lord Cormier. Leaning over the girl and extending his hand to her, the Lord asked if he could ask her to the next dance. Alice said yes, and then introduced her sister Chloe. The older sister bowed to the Lord and said she was honored to meet him. Lord Cormier bowed back and said it was an even greater honor to meet his older sister, the Lady Alice he adored. Then he said that, if she did not mind, he would be glad to dance with her later, but hesitated when his eyes fell on the cane in Chloe's hands, and then on her feet. He immediately became unbearably awkward. Chloe calmly replied that the sight of all these dancing couples gave her pleasure in itself, although she really appreciated such attention. The music started playing, and Chloe went to dance. Watching her, Chloe thought that everyone seemed to have forgotten about the scene at the ball, which Alice had arranged the last time. Count Cormier seemed a good match for her, and Chloe had yet to hear anyone mention him in a negative way, and his intentions seemed sincere. Covering her eyes and tilting her head to the side, Chloe thought she was glad for it, and immediately followed by the thought, should she be grateful to the Duke? If possible, she would prefer to avoid him. But that would be disrespectful. And why on earth had he invited her and Alice here in the first place? All because their father had helped him 3 years ago. Had Alice been right to say those words in the carriage? Remembering how he rebuked her for helping his wounded soldiers, that she so only inconvenienced the others, Chloe thought that the Duke was clearly not a man who could appreciate kindness. She hoped that the Duke had forgotten who she was, and she would manage to stay out of his sight this evening. At that moment, the crowd of guests were heard cheering that the Duke had finally come down to them. Chloe was afraid to look up. The sound of boots came to her ears louder and louder until a male figure stopped in front of her. Feeling afraid, Chloe got to her feet, but without raising her head, she said she greeted his lordship. The Duke told Lady Chloe of the House of Verdier that it had been a long time since their last meeting. He owed a great debt to her father, the Viscount, for his help 3 years ago, and would like to thank him personally, but has been too busy. So he thanked Chloe for accepting his invitation. The guests looked in their direction, listening attentively to the dialogue, and wondering why the Duke went straight to this girl without greeting anyone else. Chloe replied that she was honored to be here. The Duke lowered his gaze to Chloe's cane, and then, holding out his hand, said that it was too much to ask, but still, would she allow him to ask her to dance? Chloe was taken aback. Now, everyone was looking at her, and she realized that Duke Tisi thus deliberately decided to embarrass her in front of everyone. There were loud whispers among the guests. What exactly was going on in his lordship's mind? Had he not noticed the cane in this girl's possession? But hardly. It was more likely that this lady had done something that had caused Hostess to dislike her. As Chloe listened to the voices, she felt intense pressure and shame. Why did the Duke need to embarrass her so badly? For what purpose? But nevertheless, she had to answer him as befittingly. Chloe said she offered her sincerest apologies, but she was afraid she wasn't skilled enough to be his dance partner. The Duke stepped closer and asked if she was refusing him for the reason that too many other men had already asked her and were now waiting for their turn. If not, he sincerely hoped that she was not refusing him because he really wanted to dance with her. Chloe dignifiedly endured these humiliations, only clutching her cane tighter and looking away. A young man approached the Duke and asked if he was torturing an innocent young lady again. Couldn't Demian himself see that the poor girl was about to burst into tears? These words belonged to the first prince of the kingdom of Swanton, Johannes. The prince came closer and told his cousin that the girl had rejected his proposal, and it was ungentlemanly to keep pestering her. Putting his arm around Demian's shoulders, Johannes asked if the Duke had lost all his manners on the battlefield. Demian replied that, In his opinion, asking a beautiful woman to dance could not be a breach of etiquette, and he assured his cousin that Chloe was not the kind of person who could easily cry. Chloe still did not look up, and silently looked at the floor. Johannes told her that he apologized on behalf of his cousin because he had behaved rudely. Chloe told His Highness that, with all due respect, she believed his lordship was only concerned that she might, because of her condition, remain an unclaimed flower at the ball until it was over. It was very kind of him to show her some consideration, and so she asked the prince to take back the apology. Yes, that was how she viewed the whole humiliation. Having low self-esteem herself, even in such a case, she thought everything was done to her out of pity. The prince, calling Chloe a sensible young lady, and asked her name. The Duke stared at his brother, getting more and more annoyed. Chloe gave her name and her father's status. Suddenly, the prince put his hand on Chloe's shoulder, which was bare because of the neckline of her dress, and said that he would like to meet the Viscount. He was intrigued by the man, that he had managed to raise such a beautiful daughter, so brave. Chloe was frightened by such harshness from the prince, and then bowed low and apologized for not being able to introduce him to her father today, since she had only come with her younger sister. At the last words, she faltered, "And where is Alice?" Chloe did not take her eyes off the dance floor, and despite the whole conversation, tried to keep her younger sister in sight. However, she had not seen her on the territory of the hall for quite a long time. The prince noticed the girl's hesitation and said that she could introduce her sister to him later, but now he was somewhat busy and left for another part of the hall. Johannes called Demon with him, asking him to remove the sullen expression on his face, but the Duke answered him nothing. Chloe wondered in a panic where she could find Alice. Had she gotten herself into trouble again? Duke, as if realizing what was going on, approached and asked Chloe where her sister was now. The girl replied that the hall was so large that she could not see her, and would immediately go to look for Alice if the Duke would let her. The Duke smirked, and placing his palm over Chloe's hand that held the cane, asked if she remembered their arrangement. Their little secret arrangement regarding her cane? The Duke leaned toward Chloe's face, which made her blush. The girl replied that unless the Duke was going to give her a new cane, in that case she would ask him to let go of her hand. The Duke whispered that she would get a cane soon, and immediately snatched up the present one. He examined it and said that Chloe had bought a new cane for herself without fixing the previous one. Chloe, already getting used to the Duke's unpredictability, thought that he was simply unbearable. Noticing that Chloe is silent, the Duke said that apparently she is too desperate to find her sister, since she does not enter into a verbal altercation with him. Chloe lowered her gaze. Then the Duke said that it would not be good if Alice was drunk and ill again, and beckoned Chloe to follow him, for, as she had said, the castle was extensive, and he would give her a tour as its master. At this, however, Demian did not return the cane, but gave Chloe his hand. They went out into the garden together, and began to descend the stairs. Chloe held tightly onto the Duke's arm, but her legs were trembling. Damian said that she had apparently been practicing hard to walk on her own, but it must be very painful. Chloe told him that he was too kind to her. The Duke said he could see she still had a fighting spirit. Or had she become more experienced? The pain in her legs got worse, and Chloe thought about how much she wished she had her cane back, but didn't even have the strength to try to wrest it from the Duke's hands. At last they descended and came to a maze of bushes. The Duke looked at Chloe and asked who had put on her those jewelry, earrings and a pendant with blue stones. Chloe replied that she had done it herself. The Duke said that it wasn't surprising. It looked like a total mess. Chloe asked for her cane back, but then Damian asked if she should. He then added that he'd been told that a girl had been seen running excitedly in that direction. He had a feeling that it could have been Chloe's sister. That was why he had taken her into the garden. Chloe was mentally begging Alice not to get into trouble. But suddenly they heard a woman's moans and stopped. Before the eyes of the alarmed Chloe, Alice sat in the arms of a swarthy man and kissed him passionately. Alice noticed the Duke and Chloe only when the man began to kiss her neck. The girl frightenedly said her sister's name, but her companion did not stop from the process. and did not even look in the direction of those who came. The Duke only quietly said, "My God," and looked at Chloe to see her reaction. Alice pushed the man away from her and told him that he had to leave immediately or he would be killed. The man replied to her that he would gladly die right there on the spot. Then Alice began to beg him, calling him Eddie. Chloe recognized the name. A few days earlier, Alice had told her older sister about him. They were sitting in the same room together, and the younger one was telling her that she had met Eddie at a festival. He was a gypsy, and very intriguing. Dreamily lying on her bed, she looked forward to their next meeting. So all this time they had been seeing each other despite Alice's duty to marry. Chloe felt sick at this shock. The Duke took her by the shoulders and asked if she was all right. The girl bowed to him and apologized. Alice, saying goodbye to Eddie, adjusting her dress, returned to Chloe. Trying to justify herself, she said that the gypsy appeared literally out of nowhere and took her by surprise. Chloe pressed her lips together and then sternly demanded that Alice shut up. She had no excuses. She had to behave as required of a noblewoman. A frightened Alice was rubbing her skirt in her hands. Chloe once again apologized to the Duke and asked him if he would allow her to take a moment with her sister to send her away. The Duke replied that she could do as she wished. Chloe thanked him and ordered Alice to return immediately to the carriage. Alice immediately ran away. The Duke said that it seems that the name of the youngest daughter of Viscount Verdier will once again be on everyone's lips, and sneered that she has a real talent to become the epicenter of scandal every time she appears in society. Alice begged the Duke not to tell anyone what had happened. Damien asked why on earth would he do that. He was sure that Chloe was well aware that no one would blame him if he punished her family for the crime of bringing a stranger to his estate. Chloe thought of the doom that awaited them if she could not persuade the Duke to remain silent. She must persuade him by any means necessary. Having made a difficult decision, Chloe abruptly fell to her knees and crouched before the Duke, touching her forehead to the ground. She said that it was all her fault that she had failed to keep track of her foolish sister, and asked the Duke to punish her instead of Alice. The Duke asked Chloe, what if he refused? What would she do then? Chloe raised her head, and her heart beat fast again. Thoughts rushed through her head. She must immediately think of something to answer to save the lives of her father and Alice. After a few seconds, she said that the House of Tissy was a family that valued honor above all else, and the Duke is the sole heir, an outstanding military leader who led his army to a great victory in the war, and the first person in history to be awarded the Order of Merit by the royal family. Damien replied to Chloe that she could continue with her flattering speeches. Then Chloe recalled that he had once said that he would do anything to lead his soldiers to victory, and brought glory to those who fought alongside him in the war. It was at this time that the lord of a distant castle opened the gates to his soldiers and offered them hospitality. Though he himself no longer took up arms, his support must have been invaluable. The Duke laughed and said that, in other words, Chloe wanted him to return the favor, because that is the custom of the noble house of Tissy. Chloe gravely said that she was only asking him to show a little generosity to their humble family for former favors. Then Damien asked, hadn't he already repaid them by inviting them to this ball, to the company of the most respected noble families in the kingdom? Chloe should have blamed her own sister for trampling on this opportunity. And lastly, the Duke asked if there was anything else Chloe wanted to say to him. Chloe exclaimed, "Your lordship," and clung to the Duke's leg, bowing her head again. Damien got angry and asked what was she doing. The girl was begging for his pity just this one single time. If he could have mercy on them, she was willing to do anything he wished, and she would never forget his kindness. The Duke touched Chloe's chin with his fingers and lifted her face. Why was she doing this, he asked. The noblewoman who held her head high. Where had she gone, clinging to his legs and moaning that she'd do anything for him? It didn't suit her. Chloe could barely keep from crying. Damien held Chloe's face in his palms and looked into her eyes. At that time, fireworks were being set off in the main courtyard of the castle, lighting up the garden and the faces of the young people. Damien said that, from the looks of it, Chloe was begging him on her knees, since the reason was her younger sister's marriage. The only hope to save their family situation was for Chloe or Alice to marry a rich nobleman. To be more precise, a marriage of convenience. But what about Chloe's own life? The Duke asked if she cared about her own life. Chloe replied that she didn't. After all, for her happiness is to see people she cares about surrounded by care. Duke asked if she was really willing to do anything for that. Chloe replied that anything was possible in her power. Damien frowned and then said that then he should think about what she could do for him in return. And he wiped away the tears that had protruded in Chloe's eyes, roughly cupping her cheeks. Afterward, he would ask her to return to Verdier Manor. Chloe replied that she would love to do so, but she promised Prince Johannes that later she would introduce him to her younger sister. The Duke had said firmly that from now on, if she tried to attract the attention of Johannes or any other man in the kingdom, he would have to kill her and her entire family with his own hands. Running his thumb over Chloe's lower lip, Damien added that his generosity had limits, and he advised to refrain from visiting this place with people you didn't trust. This garden was frequented by lovers who came here to indulge in passion. So, it was better for Chloe not to return to the hall if she didn't want to end up spreading rumors about the two of them. The Duke left. Chloe was left sitting alone on the grass. Her composure had returned to her, and now she was angry that Duke Tis was such a creep. But time passed. Chloe, who had cooled down and thought everything over since then, decided to write a letter to the Duke. It sounded like this. To his lordship, Duke Damien Ernst von Tissy. Mr. Duke, I write with the hope that the letter will make you in good health. 3 months have passed since my return from the exquisite city of Swan, where the air is permeated with the delicate, fragrant odor of roses. There is talk of marriage between my sister Alice and the gentleman she met at the ball that day. Our family is incredibly pleased, as he is a noble man of high moral principles. I am well aware that this is the fruit of your generosity. After much thought as to how I might repay you for your kindness, I have come to the conclusion that... At these words, the pen stopped, and Chloe thought, was it unnecessary to write about it? Gillies entered the study and brought snacks on a tray for the mistress. Chloe thanked him and asked how Alice was feeling. The young man replied that Lady Alice had gone out briefly in the morning, but had not left the room since. She was also refusing to eat, complaining of stomach pain. Chloe nodded and clarified if Alice was no longer seeing that gypsy. Gillis replied that he didn't think so. Lady Alice seemed to have matured since then. Chloe replied to the young man that he was right. Alice should be more aware, given the talk of an engagement to Count Cormier. The Count was a good man and held a high position in society. Chloe was sure that Alice would be happily married to him. After all, he would be a better party than a tramp. Gilles, with sadness in his eyes, said he was afraid that when Lady Alice married, Mrs. Chloe would be too lonely. Chloe asked if Gillis was worried about her. The servant apologized for prying, but he was worried nonetheless. Then Chloe asked if that would happen. After all, she would still have him. His presence would be enough. Then she thanked Gilles for his concern, which made him blush and immediately turned away embarrassed. Chloe changed the subject and suggested that Gillies read her letter to the Duke, since she was here for the time being. She writes to thank him for inviting her to the ball, but it seems as if something is missing. The Duke is rather irritable, so no matter what she writes, he will still find flaws. Studying the letter, Gilles said that since the Duke has such a nasty temper, he will probably be just as angry if he doesn't get this letter in time. Loud footsteps were heard in the corridor, and then the door swung open with a clatter. On the threshold stood the Viscount Verdier. He seemed startled at first, but immediately told his daughter with a smile that they should get ready right now, since the Duke of Tissy was heading to their estate to hunt. Chloe was stunned and asked for details from her father. The man replied that, as his daughter knew, their forests were full of wild animals. He had learned the news only recently, and it seems that the Duke will arrive even earlier than expected. Chloe trembled and clenched her hands. She knew that the hunt was just an excuse to come. And in fact, the Duke needed something else. But what exactly? She felt fear again. and the image of the same black snake that the Duke had once killed appeared before her eyes. He himself was like that snake. The Viscount, on the other hand, exclaimed joyfully that, given the Duke's passion for hunting, it was no wonder he had decided to hunt in their woods too. The Viscount and Lady Chloe came out to greet the Duke of Tissy, who had arrived with his closest retinue and his closest servants. The master of the manor said they were honored to welcome him into their home and provide a place to hunt. He hoped the hot heat did not tire them on the way. The Viscount then asked the Duke how he was doing. But Damien ignored the question, and noticing only 2 courtiers behind the Viscount's back, said that they had far fewer servants. The Viscount was confused, and said that in recent years they had a bad harvest, so Chloe came forward and, saving her father, who was not strong in speech, said that, unfortunately, the castle is still a mess. They received the news of the Duke's arrival too late, but nevertheless, they would do their best to make his stay here comfortable. Thus, Chloe hinted that some of the servants hadn't come out because they were still making preparations for the guests' arrival inside the manor, and promised that despite the small number of servants, they were still able to accommodate the guests. The Duke stepped forward, standing in front of Chloe, and said with a smile that he had memorized Chloe's words. After all, a nobleman who doesn't know the concept of hospitality doesn't deserve his title. Viscount Verdier, his daughter Chloe, and the Duke of Tissy sat down at the table to dine together. The head of the family apologized to his guest that his youngest daughter was absent, as she was not feeling well. The Duke said with a smile that he hoped Lady Alice didn't have anything serious wrong with her. The Viscount thanked Damien for his concern. Then they exchanged pleasantries concerning the fine dinner. But Chloe, absorbed in her own thoughts, did not eat at all. The Duke noticed this and said what a pity it was that Lady Chloe did not like the dish. Chloe tensed up and said that the heat seemed to have had a bad effect on her appetite. Then the Duke said that it would be good for her to increase her resistance to the weather. The Viscount laughed and said that it seemed his daughter was just a little nervous in the Duke's presence. She loves the forest so much that she can often be seen falling asleep with a book in the shade of the trees. Chloe flinched when her father mentioned this. The Duke told the Viscount that Lady Chloe must have known the terrain perfectly well in that case. The Viscount replied that she did, and it would not be an exaggeration to say that the forest leading to the mountains was her personal garden. He also recalled an occasion when she had fallen seriously ill after returning from a walk, and yet, after suffering so much, she continued to walk in the forest. Now that he spoke of it, he remembered that it was just as the Duke's army was stopping at their estate. Gilles, pouring water into Chloe's glass, asked if she was all right. The girl thanked him for the water. Damien noticed that there was an unnatural connection between Chloe and this servant, and Gilles leaned too close to her, from which he immediately became irritated. He said that since Lady Chloe knew the forest well, he would like to request that she accompany him on tomorrow's hunt. The Viscount became nervous, and said that he was afraid that Chloe would only hinder the Duke because of her condition. If the Duke would allow it, he wanted to find another chaperone. Damien interrupted the Viscount and said he wanted to hear Chloe's own opinion. The girl thought about what the Duke already knew and perfectly let her know that there was only one option to answer his question. Chloe answered that if the Duke would let her servant lead the horse, she would gladly accompany him. The Duke, calling Chloe his lady, refused her and added that she would ride with him on his horse. After all, she must realize that he was not accustomed to follow others. The next morning, wearing a riding trouser suit with her cane in her hand, as always, Chloe went tensely out into the courtyard. The Duke, sitting on his horse, was already waiting for her, and as soon as he saw her, he invited her to sit in front of him. Chloe was very nervous, as she had only taken leisurely walks on horseback before, and she understood perfectly well that hunting is quite different. The Duke asked the girl to hurry up. She handed her cane to Gilles, and he anxiously asked if she would be all right. Chloe replied that everything would be fine, and sat in front of the Duke. Walking through the woods sitting on the same horse, the Duke said that it seemed Lady Chloe and her escort were quite close. Chloe replied that Gilles had been around their family since they were young, one could say since childhood, At a time when other servants were leaving because of unpaid wages, the young man chose to stay with them. To their family, Gillies is much more than just a servant. At these words, the Duke sharply struck the spurs, and the horse galloped. Chloe was frightened and asked his lordship not to gallop like that, but he demanded that she say the direction, left or right. Stammering, the girl answered that she should turn left now. The hound dogs ran forward and grabbed their prey. Horses stopped. At last Chloe could calm down the confused breath and heart. Duke said that, apparently, the dogs managed to catch a deer. Also, quite a big one. So Chloe really knows the forest. Hearing this, Chloe thought that he had deliberately galloped so sharply and quickly and started asking her for a turn in an emergency, just to test her knowledge of the forest. He was tormenting her so much. A real devil in the flesh. Duke covered Chloe's eyes with his palms and asked her to breathe deeply and slowly. Now it was possible to calm down. Chloe listened to the whisper of the Duke, leaning the back of her head against his lips, and let go of the reins. Thoughts left her head. Sitting down to dinner, Chloe said that she would send for a doctor in the morning. The Viscount asked what happened. The eldest daughter replied that the Duke was injured on the hunt. He had been attacked by a wild animal and his wound needed to be examined. Alice was also sitting with them. The Viscount anxiously asked his guest if he was badly hurt. Demian replied that he had been wounded when he rushed in pursuit on foot. You see, hunting on horseback did not give him the sensations he desired. The Duke said that if the wound was small, Chloe could stitch it up herself. Alice angrily stabbed her fork into a piece of fish and told the Duke that they did not have painkillers, so his lordship would still have to endure until the healer arrived in the morning. Chloe sternly called Alice by name, thus letting her know that it is not allowed to behave like that, and then told the Duke that the healer would do a much better job. Then Alice said that now that it was summer, dozens of villagers were getting sick from food poisoning every day, and only one single doctor was dealing with them. Chloe had always told her that they shouldn't assign a doctor to their personal use. Wasn't that why she was learning the basics of medical care? It wasn't clear if Alice wanted Chloe to help the Duke or if she still wanted the doctor to come. It seemed that she just wanted the Duke to stay with non-healing wounds, and no one would help him at all. The resentment had stayed with her since that ball. Wiping his mouth with a napkin, the Duke said that he did not wish to take such a valuable resource away from the people of their domain. After all, he is only a guest, and asked Chloe if she would find it a hardship to come to his room after dinner. Afraid of hurting the Duke because of his lack of professionalism, Chloe asked if it would not be better to call a doctor. The Viscount still agreed with his daughter and decided to call the doctor right away. The Duke seriously said that a few years ago, when his soldiers stayed in the castle of Verdier, the sight of Lady Chloe tending to their wounds made the deepest impression on him, and he believes she will do an excellent job on his wound as well. The Viscount glowered and asked the Duke if he remembered that. The Duke replied that he had not forgotten a single detail about the events that had happened in these lands, and looked at Chloe with a sidelong glance. Chloe again felt as if a snake was coiling around her. When the dinner was over, the girl came to the room to the Duke, carrying a tray with medical instruments. Damien said she looked like she was being led to the gallows. Flipping to a page in the book, he added that a simple request shouldn't inspire such terror. Chloe asked the Duke to show his wound. Damien asked why she couldn't do it herself. The girl said that, in that case, he should at least roll up his sleeve. Damien said she could handle it just fine on her own. The girl proudly replied that, with all due respect, it was not proper for her, an unmarried girl, to touch a man's body. The Duke said that it was very old-fashioned and threw off his shirt completely. Chloe was surprised and stared at the Duke. Damien said that it might be hard for Chloe to resist, but it would be better if she didn't stare at him so much. The girl blushed and thought that she had never told the Duke to take off her shirt. Coming to her senses, she began to treat the wound on her arm, warning that it might hurt further. Duke said he wanted her to make him suffer as much as possible, and asked if her former mentor was a healer. The girl replied that he was, and began to stitch up the wound. Duke said that those skills must be very handy, could come in handy in any situation. Chloe said that she had indeed learned about medicine from him, but in a very different direction from the one she was using now. Then the Duke asked how she stitches up his wounds. The girl frankly admitted that it was the way she usually did her embroideries. Demian laughed heartily and said that this was the first time in his life when he regarded embroidery as a useful occupation. Chloe did the work attentively and looked at the laughing Duke with slight surprise. He didn't seem intimidating now. Having calmed down, Demian asked if Alice had arranged any more secret trysts as darkness fell. Chloe answered him that he should refrain from talking now, and that he should be as still as possible. But the Duke demanded an answer to his question. Then Chloe answered that, since that night, Alice had realized the error of her ways, and thanks to his lordship, there was talk of a marriage between Alice and Count Cormier. She told the Duke that she was grateful to him. Damian said that if he had known that his silence would be rewarded with 3 months of silence on Chloe's part, he would never have granted such a favor. Chloe and Duke's heart beat quickly, and the young man leaned over the girl, looking into her eyes. Blushing, Chloe said that he was too close, but the Duke asked her to answer him. Looking away, the girl admitted that she'd written him letters. Damian said he hadn't gotten any. Chloe said she couldn't bring herself to send them. The Duke moved closer again and said that her pathetic attempts to lie were frustrating. Chloe rested her hands on Duke's chest and again asked him to move farther away while hiding her face, and then blurted out that she kept silent for the reason that he hates her. That was the whole point. Duke was taken aback and asked if that was really her answer. Chloe, still without looking up, said that she was well aware of how intolerably repulsive the Duke found her, and that was why she had hesitated for so long, and was not sure how she should repay him. Shame came next. Chloe apologized and hastily got up from her chair, saying that she had finished what she had come for and would leave now so as not to bother him anymore. Holding the tray with one hand and holding the tray with one hand, and holding the cane with the other, Chloe took a step. But under her feet, there was a shirt, thrown off earlier by the Duke, and the girl slipped on it. Chloe began to fall, dropped the tray, and all the tools scattered on the floor. Demian's reflexes reacted lightning fast, and he picked up the girl by the waist, preventing her from falling to the floor next. Then he laid her down on the bed, hovering on top of her. They stared into each other's eyes for a long time, not realizing what had just happened. Then, Chloe looked at the Duke's wounded arm, with which he had picked her up on the fly, and saw that the wound had opened. The Duke replied that she could always stitch it up afresh. Then Chloe, blushing and almost crying, asked his lordship what he wanted of her in the first place. Demian took one of the strands of Chloe's hair in his hand, and bringing it to his lips, said that he thought she already knew everything. Chloe turned away and said that she was only here at her father's request. The Duke asked Lady Chloe if she really thought that was the only thing her father wanted. Chloe remembered that they had already had a similar dialogue 3 years ago. She told the Duke that she understood why he questioned people's intentions because he had learned not to trust others on the battlefield. However, thinking that every woman in the kingdom desperately wants to marry him is a selfish delusion. Isn't that the case? The Duke looked at Chloe in surprise and then laughed. The girl did not understand what exactly he laughed at her words and thought that he was out of his mind. Having laughed enough, the Duke asked how about, in that case, testing her theory in practice? Demian got off Chloe, gave her a hand to sit down and said she could go, because she had already done what she had come for. Chloe returned to her room, mentally not understanding why she only tormented herself with the question of how to thank such a terrible man. On the dressing table lay 2 items, a letter and white gloves. Both were presentations assigned to the Duke. Taking one of the gloves in her hands, Chloe thought sadly that it would probably be foolish to give them to him. And then she thought angrily that while she was stitching, she should have taken a thicker needle. Putting the glove back on the table, she told herself not to let her emotions get the better of her. After all, thanks to the Duke, Alice had met Count Cormier. Opening the window to get some fresh air, Chloe pondered that when Alice married, things in their home would get better. Everything would be fine. But because of her antics in the evening, she changed the course of events. The next morning, at breakfast, the Duke stunned the entire family with his announcement. Alice asked her sister if the Duke had hit his head last night. The Viscount said he wasn't sure he heard his lordship correctly. Then the Duke repeated that he was proposing his marriage to the Viscount's daughter, Lady Alice Verdier. The Viscount laughed nervously and said that the fact was that there was already talk of a marriage between Alice and Count Cormier. The Duke replied to this that it did not alter his desire to offer her hand and heart, and said with a smile that he didn't seem to be good enough for their family, since they kept making inappropriate remarks. An ominous aura prevailed in the room. All the members of the Verdier family lowered their heads, not knowing what to say to that. The Duke had shocked them all, and although his party was enviable, he was the second in title after the prince in the entire kingdom. They were well aware that their family's position was too low. Alice's reputation was loud. And she herself had never had even a friendly sympathy for his lordship. They had not even exchanged phrases particularly. The Viscount, considerably nervous, said that, of course, that was not the point. But whatever his opinion, he must respect his daughter's wishes. The Duke agreed that it was necessary, and standing up, he said he would give them 3 days to think about it, and in the meantime he would stop at his estate nearby. Putting gloves on his hands, Damien said he hoped they would think carefully about his proposal. After he left, Alice ran off to her room, and collapsing on her bed, began sobbing into her pillows. Chloe followed her, and her younger sister told her that she had never wanted to be a duchess in her life. She was well aware of what an opportunity it was for their family, but Chloe herself didn't realize what the Duke was doing. Why make such an unexpected proposal? Unless he wasn't deliberately mocking and decided to conduct the very test he talked about last night in such a way. Realizing that the argument was just to prove that not every girl wants to marry him, Chloe told Alice directly that she could disagree if she didn't want to, and she promised her little sister that she would talk to her father. Alice thanked Chloe and gave her a big hug. But then she asked her eldest, what if something goes wrong and she can't get married afterwards? What would happen to them then? After all, now that the Duke had proposed, it would surely end her relationship with Count Cormier. Chloe asked Alice not to cry and promised that everything would be all right. Some time would pass, and she would receive many more marriage proposals from equally worthy men of high standing. No need to worry about anything, just a little patience. Then Alice admitted that she was still in love with Eddie. Chloe was about to say that she needed to break up with the man, but Alice admitted that she was carrying his baby. As she continued to cry, she panically asked her older sister, what should she do? What should she do and move on with her life? Chloe couldn't say anything sensible to her sister and left her, going to her room. It was evening, but she had been replaying her younger sister's words in her head all day, massaging a point on her forehead. Was this what had happened because they had placed such an impossible burden on Alice? If this was the price they had to pay for their selfishness, in that case she needed to prevent this marriage at all costs. All censure of her younger sister for her association with the gypsy was gone. Now knowing how much she loved the man and carried his child under her heart, she had to do everything for her heart. She had to do everything for her happiness, even if Alice herself would lose her title and bring shame on the family. What else was left? Could one go against one's own happiness? Chloe wanted to see Alice happy. She had to talk to her father first. The next morning, at breakfast, the Viscount asked what brought Chloe to him. The girl replied that she wanted to talk to him about Alice's marriage. After pondering it, the father interrupted his daughter and said that he, too, had been pondering it all night. The very prospect of Alice marrying a member of House Tissy pleased him and worried him at the same time. Chloe asked what he meant by that. House Tissy is a family that values nobility. That means they would never kick Alice away, even if they found her character or behavior inappropriate. Duke Tissy certainly knows what a cruel fate awaits a divorced woman in this kingdom. Chloe told her father that she had something to share with him, but no sooner had she said it than Gilles burst into the room and said loudly that Lady Alice was missing. The Viscount stood up and asked where could she have gone. Gilles said he found a letter in her room and held it out to the Lord. The letter said, "To my beloved father and dearest sister, I grew up observing my father's boundless love for my mother. I have learned through you that true love can overcome both sickness and death, because you are living proof of the power of love. I no longer wish to ignore the aspirations of my heart, and I also want to hold my head high for the sake of my child that I carry in my womb, and prove to myself that there is no such thing as forbidden love. From now on, I will renounce the name Verdier and simply live as Alice. I apologize, Father. Don't forgive me for such a selfish act. Chloe, forgive me for such a selfish act. Chloe, I'm sorry. I hope one day I'll get a chance to make it up to you." Her father's tears covered the paper, and as he reached the end, he fainted. Chloe and Gilles lifted him in their arms. The last words of the letter were these: "Though I am an ungrateful daughter, please know that I am sincere when I say I love you. With a heavy heart and 1,000 apologies, Alice." The Viscount was carried to bed. As he lay in bed, he asked his daughter sitting next to him if she knew about this. Chloe replied that she had vaguely guessed that there was a man who cared for Alice. She couldn't afford to tell her father everything, lest she hurt him even more. Her father had said that the fact that Chloe had not immediately informed him about it showed that she herself did not approve of the man's choice. And even if she found him distasteful, he was apparently a good-for-nothing prick. Chloe said with a faint smile that if Alice had run off with him despite her objections, she was sure he must be a decent man. Placing her palms over her father's hand, Chloe said that she trusted Alice, and she was sure to be fine, and that her father should be thinking about his recovery right now. The shock of his daughter's escape had struck the Viscount's nerves and heart, and now he had to heal. And as for the Duke of Tissy, Chloe asked her father not to worry and promised that she would deal with it herself. Going out into the corridor, Chloe asked Gilles if he was involved in Alice's escape. Turning around, she said that she realized it the moment he brought the letter. After all, he would never have entered Alice's room without her permission, which meant that she had let him in and handed him the letter herself. Gilles said there was no use in hiding it from Lady Chloe and admitted his guilt. He expected a punishment from Lady Chloe, or a scolding, but Chloe, on the contrary, thanked him for being by Alice's side at the moment of her departure. She herself was not sure how to act. That's why she was grateful to Gilles for helping her escape. And now her baby would be by her father's side, as it should be. Then Chloe said that what was done, and now they should bear the misfortune that had overtaken them with courage. Gilles wanted to reach out his hand to Lady Chloe, but clenched his fist and said that he hoped she did not blame herself for the situation, and asked her not to think that she should take responsibility for it, because if she did, he didn't know how he would live with it. Chloe answered Gilles that now she was the only person who could look after the Verdier house, and she would definitely find a way for them all to survive, even if it means making some very dangerous choices. The Duke, meanwhile, enjoying the sunset in his mansion, sipping whiskey on the rocks, had yet to speculate on how events at the Verdier house would turn out. 3 days later, Chloe came to visit the Duke. Damien asked if his marriage proposal had been so favorable that Lady Chloe had decided to notify him of the decision in person. Chloe replied that it was not something that should be discussed in a letter, and so she came. The Duke suddenly asked the girl if she was sick with an infectious disease. Chloe confusedly replied that no, and did not understand the essence of the question. And then Damien said that in that case she did not have to stand so far away, and she could come closer to him. The Duke looked homely, no styling, shirt half unbuttoned. He was amused by what was happening, and he asked Chloe to sit next to him on the sofa. The girl wanted to refuse, but he replied that he did not take no refusal, as it was an order. Then Chloe sat down, proudly raising her head and covering her eyes. The Duke said that his wound was not healing. Chloe then asked him if he had called a doctor. Damien answered no, and asked if she could help him apply the ointment. Nearby on the table was a whole suitcase filled with vials of ointment. Chloe asked. Did his lordship not have hands? After all, the wound was on one, and the ointment could safely apply the second free hand. The Duke said that he could easily tell what Chloe was thinking just by looking at her expression. Chloe sighed and replied that he was deeply mistaken. Eventually, Damien removed his shirt from one shoulder and Chloe began to apply ointment to his arm, explaining that the weather was too sweltering right now, which was not at all conducive to healing. Therefore, it would be better for Duke to be indoors most of the time, and spending time outside the estate would only slow healing. Duke said that the summers at the Tissy family estate are not as pleasant as they are here, and he likes the feeling of scorched skin from head to toe. Chloe, embarrassed, told the Duke that he could already remove his hand. Now Damien asked for an answer as to why his offer was rejected. Chloe said that marriage was physically impossible for her sister right now. The Duke asked what was the reason. Had she suddenly passed away? Chloe, clutching the hem of her skirt in fear, wondered before she revealed the truth. Could she ask the question? The Duke allowed it, and then Chloe asked if the reason he wanted to marry her little sister was because of herself. The Duke said he was curious as to why she'd decided that. Chloe said she'd asked about his intention to enter her family to completely ruin her life. Duke chuckled and asked if she herself remembered what she had recently told him. The thoughts that every woman in the kingdom desperately wants to marry you are selfish delusions. Those words belonged to Chloe. And afterward, the Duke added that he thought Lady Chloe herself was self-entered and on the verge of ignorance. Chloe blushed. Damien asked, does she really think that he would marry the daughter of an unremarkable and in-debt viscount just to get rid of her sick sister? Chloe proudly turned away and said that he was right, and it was unlikely. The Duke said that she was surprisingly funny at times and asked if she knew that. Chloe replied that she didn't know and asked if it turned out that he was in love with Alice. Damien laughed and asked in response, did he look like a romantic who believed that marriage should be based on love? Chloe then said that there was only one explanation left for why he had proposed to her sister. The Duke asked what could it be. Chloe began to reason out loud. There must be some good reason for marrying the daughter of House Verdier that he can't reveal. The Duke asked Chloe to continue. If there is a justification why he should refuse to marry the most enviable lady in the kingdom for the sake of a daughter from a low-status family, he probably doesn't care who he marries, which means he might even prefer to marry a woman with such a noticeable flaw that no one would look twice at her. The Duke leaned over to Chloe and gave the example of a woman who is unable to walk because of a leg injury. Chloe replied to him that perhaps if she lost both legs, she would be an even more perfect bride for him. Both of them realized that there was a secret behind those words, and Chloe understood that the Duke was playing some kind of chess game, a strategy in which he wanted an unremarkable and inconspicuous wife. But when she said the last words, Damien took Chloe by the chin and covered her lips with his, rapidly deepening the kiss. Chloe shuddered, but she responded to him and didn't push the Duke away.